This video shows how to create a while loop to run a set of commands until it's signaled to stop. We'll use the on button A pressed event to start the loop running, and then the on button B pressed event to stop the loop. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into input and set those two up. I'm going to drag out the on button A pressed, or click on it, and then I'll drag it down to where I want it. And then we want one that says on button B, so I'm going to duplicate this and then click on the A and set it to B. So now I have my two event blocks. I want to put a while loop inside the on button A pressed event, so I'm going to go into loops and drag out the while and place it inside the on button A pressed block. Now you can see this is set to false. What's going to happen is if this tries to evaluate, the answer is going to be false and it will never start up because this wants something that's true to make it work. If I click on that, we can see we can set it to true. Now that will just run forever. So what we really need is something that's evaluated, and it'll evaluate to true as long as we want the loop to run. And when we press the B button, the value will change so that this evaluates to false. Okay, so what we want to do is have a variable that we can change the value in. So we're going to go into variables and click on make a variable. And then we want to type in the name of the variable. And I'm going to call mine keep looping. And then click OK. Now I want to initialize this variable to false before when the code first starts. So I'm going to click on the set keep looping to 0. Put it into the on start block. Now we don't need this forever block, so I'm going to just drag this out and get rid of it so it doesn't clutter the screen. This is set to 0 and that's where we want it. Now we want to replace the static true here with a comparison that uses keep looping as our control. So we'll go into logic and drag out any of the comparison blocks and place it directly over the true statement. And that will override the true, and then it'll use this comparison instead. Now we want to set it up so that keep looping is set to 1 when the loop runs, and we need another keep looping variable for the comparison. So I'll drag one out of variables and place it on the left side of the comparison block. Now set the right side to 1. The last thing we need to do here is set keep looping to 1 to start the loop. So I'm going to duplicate this keep looping block and drag it above the do loop. Now I will change the 0 to a 1 to set keep looping to 1. When button A is pressed, keep looping will be set to 1 and the loop will now repeat as long as it stays set to 1. Now what I want to do here is just set up a counter that increments by 1 every time the loop is executed, and then we'll display that number. So I'm going to go into variables and make another variable, and I'm going to call that variable counter. Click OK. And I want to initialize my counter variable to 0. So up in the start loop, we can copy this, drag it in there, oopsie, and then change the variable to counter. And we have that set to 0. Now we want to add 1 to the counter every time we go through this loop. So let's go back into variables and click the change counter by loop and drag that into the while loop. Now we want to change it by 1 every time, and this is already set to 1, so we'll just leave that. Now I want to show the number every time, so I'm going to go into basic and click on show number and drag that into the while loop underneath the change counter. And then I'm going to put the variable counter into this spot. So I want another copy of counter, so I'm going to go into variables and select counter and then drag that over the show number. And then the next step I have is I want to put a pause in there to give us enough time to see the number before it moves on. So I'm going to scroll down to the pause. Oops, and place that under the show number. And then I'm going to set this to, I can set this to 500 milliseconds or a half a second. So now let's try that out over on the simulator. So I'm going to click the A button and we can see it counting. But now what we need to do is stop it. So to do that, really all I need to do is repeat these two commands. Set keep looping to 0 so that that'll stop the loop, and then reset our counter. So I'm going to duplicate each one of these and drag them into the on button B. Now, this keep looping equals 1 will no longer be true. So this while loop will stop. Keep looping will be set to 0. And this will be reset. So when this does get pressed again, it'll start counting properly. So let's go ahead and test it. I'm going to press the A button. Okay, it's counting. Now I'm going to press the B button. And it stops. Now I'm going to press the A button again to see if it resets. And sure enough, it does. And then I can press the B button to stop. So that's it for this video. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my newsletter that offers more tips and ideas on teaching this subject in classes. And also you'll get a free downloadable worksheet that you can use in your classroom. And there's a link to that in the show notes and a link to the blog post that goes along with this video. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.